The massive briefing hall on planet Kepler-442b felt like a zoo gone wrong. Dozens of alien species filled the room, their strange voices creating a symphony of hisses, clicks, and electronic buzzes. The air smelled like metal and something that reminded you of old fish. At the center of it all sat a glowing holographic display showing tactical maps of the sector. General Robert Kane stood with his back straight, watching the chaos unfold. His weathered face showed no emotion as the alien commanders talked among themselves. Kane had seen enough wars to know when someone was making a mistake. Today, that someone wasn't him. The Drachner delegation sat on the left side of the room. These reptilian warriors looked like someone had crossed a crocodile with a bodybuilder and given the result advanced technology. Their scales shifted from dark green to brown as they moved, and their yellow eyes missed nothing. Commander Vextar, their leader, was particularly large, even by Drachner standards. His forked tongue flicked out every few seconds, tasting the air around him. On the right sat the Chiteks representatives. If the Drachner looked like killer crocodiles, the Chiteks looked like giant ants that had learned to walk upright and wear armor. Their compound eyes reflected the room's lights in 1,000 tiny rainbows. When they talked, their mandibles clicked together like someone rapidly opening and closing scissors. Both groups kept glancing at the human section with barely hidden amusement. The humans looked so ordinary compared to everyone else. No scales, no natural armor, no impressive size. Just regular people in military uniforms, sitting quietly in their assigned area. What really caught the aliens' attention were the dogs. "I cannot believe this," Vexter whispered to his aide, though his voice carried across the room anyway. "The humans actually brought their domestic animals to a military briefing. Do they think this is some kind of game?" His aide, a smaller Drachner with darker scales, nodded enthusiastically. "Perhaps they plan to use them as emergency food supplies when rations run low." The Chiteks delegation found this hilarious. Their leader, a particularly large specimen with bright red markings on her carapace, clicked her mandibles rapidly. "Maybe the animals are their secret weapons," she said in her translated voice. "Watch out, enemies of the galaxy. The humans will make you play fetch until you surrender." More laughter rippled through the alien sections. Even some of the other species joined in. The blue-skinned Aquarians made gurgling sounds that passed for chuckling. The energy beings from the Vortex Nebula flickered in patterns that their translators interpreted as amusement. Lieutenant Colonel Jessica Park sat in the front row of the human section, her hands folded in her lap. She had been through enough diplomatic meetings to know when to stay quiet and when to speak up. This was definitely a stay quiet moment. Her brown eyes remained focused on the holographic display, but she could feel the weight of alien attention on her and her colleagues. Behind her, Sergeant Danny Rodriguez was busy with Rex, his German shepherd partner. The big dog sat perfectly still, his thick brown and black coat gleaming under the artificial lights. Rex's ears were perked up, and his dark eyes tracked every movement in the room. The dog could sense the tension, even if he couldn't understand. The politics. Rodriguez adjusted Rex's tactical harness one more time, checking each buckle and strap. The harness looked like a high-tech vest, complete with communication equipment, medical supplies, and attachment points for various gear. To the aliens, it probably looked like an elaborate pet costume. "Look at that one," another Chiteks pointed at Rodriguez and Rex. "The human is actually putting clothing on the animal. Next they will paint its claws and teach it to dance." The mockery continued for several more minutes. Aliens made jokes about humans bringing emotional support animals to war zones. They wondered aloud if the dogs would need their own spacesuits and tiny weapons. Some suggested that maybe the humans planned to use the animals as living shields or walking food sources. Through it all, the human delegation remained silent. General Kane's jaw muscles twitched occasionally, but he never spoke. Park kept her expression completely neutral. Rodriguez continued checking and rechecking his equipment, while Rex sat like a statue. The dog seemed to be the only one paying real attention to what mattered. While everyone else focused on the jokes and insults, Rex's nose twitched constantly. He could smell things that no scanner could detect. His ears moved like radar dishes, picking up sounds that no microphone registered. His eyes tracked shadows and movements that escaped even the most advanced visual sensors. If any of the aliens had bothered to really look at Rex, they might have noticed something important. This wasn't just a pet wearing a costume. This was a warrior preparing for battle, just like every other soldier in the room. But they were too busy laughing to pay attention. That would be their first mistake. The first light of dawn was barely touching the horizon when reality itself began to tear apart. It started as a small shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Then the shimmer grew larger, twisting and writhing until it looked like someone had cut a hole in the sky with an invisible knife. Captain Billy Thompson was on morning patrol when he saw it happen. One moment he was walking the perimeter, checking on guard posts, and enjoying his coffee. The next moment, the world went insane. The tear in space grew wider, and something pushed through from the other side. At first, it looked like a giant metal spider covered in oil. But, as more of the creature emerged, Billy realized it wasn't metal at all. The thing's surface moved and shifted like it was alive. Parts that looked solid 1 second turned liquid the next, then hardened again in completely different shapes. "Base, this is Thompson," he spoke into his radio, trying to keep his voice steady. "We've got contact at Sector 7. Unknown hostiles emerging from what looks like a spatial rift." Before anyone could respond, more tears opened across the sky. Dozens of them, hundreds. The air filled with the sound of reality being ripped apart, like fabric tearing, but 1,000 times louder. The creatures that came through defied description. They were part machine, part living tissue, part something else entirely. Some looked like enormous insects with metal wings and organic weapons. Others resembled twisted versions of tanks, but their armor moved like muscle tissue. All of them had one thing in common. They were huge, hostile, and heading straight for the colony. In the main command center, chaos erupted immediately. The Drakner tactical officer, a seasoned warrior named Skullrender, was the first to try. His advanced scanning equipment, the massive displays that normally showed detailed battlefield information, suddenly went black. "What is happening to my sensors?" Skullrender roared, his claws clicking frantically over alien controls. Sparks shot from the equipment as circuits overloaded and systems crashed. "Everything is dead. The creatures are doing something to our technology." The Chitex commander tried her psychic networks next. Her species had evolved to share thoughts instantly across vast distances, making them perfect coordinators for large military operations. But when she reached out with her mind, she hit a wall of static and interference. "The hive mind is broken." She clicked in panic, her mandibles chattering uncontrollably. "I cannot reach my swarm leaders. The connection is severed." Across the battlefield, alien forces that had seemed so confident just hours before began to fall apart. The Drakner warriors fired their plasma cannons at the approaching creatures, but the energy beams simply bounced off like flashlight beams hitting a mirror. The creature's armor shifted and changed, adapting to each attack in real time. The deployed their usual swarm tactics, but without their psychic coordination. The individual soldiers had no idea what their neighbors were doing. Units that should have moved as one flowing mass instead stumbled around like confused ants after someone kicked their hill. Other alien species fared no better. The Aquarians' sonic weapons produced no effect. The energy beings from the vortex nebula found their attacks absorbed and redirected back at them. Every technological advantage the Coalition possessed seemed useless against these new enemies. "Fall back to secondary positions," ordered the Drakner field commander, but his communication systems were failing too. Half his troops couldn't hear. The order and the other half were too busy running to follow it anyway. The creatures moved forward like a living tide. Where they passed, the ground itself seemed to change. Metal structures dissolved and reformed into twisted sculptures. Plants withered and died, then grew back as something completely different. Even the air shimmered with unnatural energy. In all this chaos, one group remained calm. The human soldiers had taken position on a small hill overlooking the main battle. They watched the alien retreat with professional interest, but showed no signs of panic. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez knelt behind a fallen log, his rifle ready, but not yet firing. Beside him, Rex stood with every muscle tensed. The German shepherd's thick fur was standing straight up along his neck and back. A low, rumbling growl came from deep in his chest, so quiet that only Rodriguez could hear it. "I know, boy," Rodriguez whispered, one hand briefly touching Rex's head. "You can smell them coming, can't you? Even through all that interference." Rex's nose twitched constantly, processing scents that no machine could detect. His ears moved like satellite dishes, tracking sounds that bypassed every electronic sensor, while the aliens' advanced technology failed around them. The dog's ancient senses worked perfectly. The creatures were close now. Close enough that even the humans could smell the strange metallic odor they carried. Close enough to see the way. Their surfaces rippled and flowed like liquid mercury, but Rex had smelled them coming 20 minutes ago. Rex's black nose worked overtime, filtering through dozens of scents that filled the battlefield. There was the smell of burning electronics from destroyed alien equipment, the metallic temps of spilled coolant from damaged vehicles, the acrid smoke from plasma weapon discharge. But underneath it all was something else, something that made every instinct in his body scream danger. It smelled like metal mixed with rotting meat and electrical circuits, wrong in every possible way. The German shepherd's head snapped up suddenly, his ears pointing toward a patch of forest that looked completely empty. His lips pulled back slightly, showing white teeth, and a single sharp bark cut through the noise of the chaotic battlefield. The sound carried across the human positions like a signal. Immediately, every dog in the unit responded. Bella, a Belgian Malinois, working with Corporal Jenny Walsh, raised her head and barked twice. Duke, a massive Rottweiler paired with Private Andy Chen, added his deeper voice to the chorus. Within seconds, a dozen different breeds were all looking in the same direction, all sensing the same invisible threat. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez had worked with Rex for 3 years. He knew the difference between the dog's alert bark, his play bark, his food bark, and his enemy bark. This was definitely enemy. Contact. 200 meters, northeast tree line. Rodriguez called into his radio, one hand already unclipping Rex's tactical leash. Multiple targets. Lieutenant Kevin Parker lowered his binoculars and squinted toward the tree line. His thermal scope showed nothing but green vegetation and brown tree trunks. No heat signatures. No movement. No signs of life. At all. "I'm not seeing anything on thermal imaging," Parker replied, sweeping his scope back and forth across the indicated area. "Are you sure? The area looks completely clear." Colonel Lisa Hayes was crouched behind a defensive barrier about 50 meters away, but she heard the exchange over the radio. She had been a military dog handler before becoming an officer, and she understood something that many people didn't. Dogs were often right when technology was wrong. "Trust the dog," Hayes said simply, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had seen combat before. "Rex has never been wrong about threats." Rodriguez looked down at his partner. Rex was practically vibrating with controlled energy, every muscle in his body coiled and ready for action. The dog's dark eyes were locked on something invisible in the forest, and his tail was rigid with concentration. "All right, boy," Rodriguez whispered, releasing the tactical leash completely. "Show me what you've found." Rex moved forward like a guided missile. His massive paws made almost no sound as he picked his way through the undergrowth, weaving between fallen logs and thorny bushes. Rodriguez followed close behind, his rifle ready, but his eyes watching his dog rather than scanning for enemies. He couldn't see. The alien positions they passed were in complete disarray. Draknar soldiers stood around broken equipment, arguing loudly about how to repair their sensors. Chitek's warriors wandered in small confused groups, cut off from their HFY hive mind coordination. None of them paid any attention to the human soldier and his dog. Moving through their midst, that was their mistake. Rex suddenly stopped and went completely still. His nose was pointed directly at what looked like empty air about 10 feet away. Rodriguez could see nothing, no shimmer, no distortion, no sign that anything was there. But Rex knew better. The dog gathered himself and launched into the air like a furry missile. For a split second, it looked like he was attacking nothing. Then his powerful jaws clamped down on something solid, and the world changed. The air flickered like a broken television screen. Suddenly, where there had been empty space, a nightmare appeared. The creature looked like someone had taken a praying mantis, made it the size of a horse, and covered it in living metal armor. Its camouflage system sparked and failed as teeth found the joint where its head connected to its body. The thing let out a sound like grinding gears, mixed with a dying animal. Its metal claws scraped against Rex's tactical harness as it tried to shake him off. But the dog held on with the determination that had made his ancestors successful hunters for thousands of years. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. His rifle barked 3 times, placing bullets exactly where Rex's attack had revealed the creature's weak points. The thing collapsed in a shower of sparks and strange-smelling fluids, but Rex was already moving toward his next target. All across the human lines, the same scene was playing out. Dogs were leading their handlers to enemies that no scanner could find, creatures that had been invisible to every advanced detection system in the galaxy were being hunted down by animals that relied on senses older than civilization. From his observation post, Commander Vexstar watched in growing amazement as the humans systematically eliminated threats that his people couldn't even see. "How is this possible?" he whispered to his aide. "Our equipment is generations ahead of theirs. Our sensors can detect a single molecule of foreign matter. How are their animals finding enemies we cannot?" The aide had no answer. Like everyone else, he could only watch as evolution proved more reliable than technology. The evacuation center had turned into a war zone in minutes. What started as an orderly retreat became a desperate fight for survival when the creatures broke through the outer defenses. The large concrete building that was supposed to be a safe haven now looked like it had been hit by a tornado made of claws and metal. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez lay on his back behind a pile of overturned tables and chairs, red spreading across his uniform from a deep gash in his shoulder. His rifle had been knocked away when one of the creatures sent him flying into a wall. Every time he tried to reach for it, pain shot through his arm like lightning. The creatures were getting closer. He could hear their metal feet clicking on the concrete floor, could smell that awful mix of machinery and death that followed them everywhere. In a few seconds, they would round the makeshift barricade, and that would be the end of everything. Rex stood directly over his fallen partner, every muscle in his body tense and ready. The German shepherd's lips were pulled back in a snarl that would have made a wolf proud. His dark eyes tracked the approaching enemies, calculating distances and angles like a living weapon system. Blood matted his fur where claws had raked across his side, but he showed no signs of backing down. Rodriguez tried to speak, to give Rex the command to run and save himself, but his throat felt like sandpaper, and only a weak croak came out. The dog glanced down at him for just a moment, and Rodriguez saw something in those intelligent eyes that made his chest tight. Rex wasn't going anywhere. The German shepherd lifted his head toward the ceiling and let out a sound unlike anything Rodriguez had ever heard from him before. It wasn't a bark or a whine. It was something deeper, older, a howl that seemed to carry the voice of every wolf that had ever protected its pack. The sound echoed off the concrete walls and rolled across the battlefield like thunder. Every dog in the sector heard it and understood. Bella was 3 buildings away when Rex's call reached her. The Belgian Malinois had been helping her handler, Corporal Jenny Walsh, evacuate civilians from a damaged shelter. When she heard that ancient call for help, everything else became secondary. She looked at Walsh once, received a quick nod, and took off running. Duke heard it too. The massive Rottweiler was guarding a supply depot with Private Andy Chen when the howl cut through the noise of battle. Without hesitation, the big dog abandoned his post and charged toward the evacuation center, his powerful legs carrying him faster than most humans could run. Across the battlefield, the same scene played out over and over. Dogs left their assigned positions and converged on the evacuation center like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Some came with their handlers, others came alone, their human partners either wounded or pinned down elsewhere. They moved like a pack that had been hunting together for years, even though most of them had never worked as a group before. Instincts that went back thousands of generations told them exactly what to do. Bella arrived first, sliding through a broken window in a shower of glass and concrete dust. She took in the situation at a glance, Rodriguez bleeding behind the barricade, Rex standing guard, creatures closing in from 3 directions. Without pause, she threw herself at the nearest enemy, her teeth finding the joint where its leg connected to its body. Duke came through what used to be the front door, which now looked more like a large hole in the wall. The Rottweiler was built like a furry bulldozer, and he used every pound of his weight to slam into a creature that was reaching for a wounded Chidek soldier. The alien warrior had been trying to crawl to safety with 2 broken legs, but now he found himself being dragged behind cover by a dog whose handler was nowhere in sight. More dogs poured into the building. Scout, a small terrier mix who normally worked with the bomb disposal unit, somehow ended up next to Commander Vex. The Dragner commander was trapped under a fallen beam, his yellow blood pooling on the floor around him. Scout grabbed the alien's equipment harness in his teeth and pulled with every ounce of strength in his small body. "This cannot be happening," Vextar whispered, his voice weak but filled with amazement. "The animal has no orders. Its handler is not even here. Why does it risk itself for me?" The terrier didn't answer, couldn't answer, but he didn't stop pulling either. When the beam shifted and Vextar could finally drag himself free, Scout immediately positioned himself between the commander and the approaching enemies, bearing tiny teeth that looked ridiculous compared to the metal monsters bearing down on them. All across the evacuation center, the same impossible scene was playing out. Dogs were protecting wounded soldiers, regardless of species. They formed defensive lines around groups of civilians they had never met. They dragged injured aliens to safety while their own handlers fought desperately in other parts of the building. Rex coordinated it all with barks, growls, and body language that the other dogs read like a book. When he shifted position, they shifted with him. When he focused on a particular threat, they supported him. It was like watching a military unit that had trained together for years, except these soldiers had 4 legs and couldn't understand a single word of the tactical manuals. The creatures kept coming, but now they were facing something they hadn't encountered before. Not advanced technology or superior firepower, but something much older and more dangerous. They were facing a pack. The main assembly hall aboard the Coalition flagship Unity had never seen anything quite like this before. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species filled the massive space, but for once, everyone was completely quiet. All eyes were focused on the small stage at the front of the room, where something unprecedented was about to happen. Rex stood perfectly still next to Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, who was still wearing a sling from his shoulder injury. The German Shepherd's posture was military straight, his ears up and alert, But there was something different in his dark eyes today. He seemed to understand that this moment was important, even if he couldn't grasp exactly why. Around his thick neck hung a medal, unlike any other in galactic history. The Galactic Cross of Valor was traditionally made from rare metals found only in the core systems, shaped into a star pattern that caught and reflected light from every angle. But this one was different. This one had been specially modified with a collar instead of a ribbon, because the recipient couldn't wear it the traditional way. Rex was the first non-human to ever receive the Coalition's highest military honor. Admiral Robert Kane stepped up to the podium, his dress uniform decorated with ribbons from conflicts spanning 3 decades. But today wasn't about his accomplishments, or anyone else's, from the human contingent. Today was about recognizing something that had changed the entire war. 3 weeks ago, Kane began, his voice carrying easily through the hall's speaker system. We almost lost everything. The enemy had technology that made our sensors useless. Their camouflage was perfect. Their jamming systems shut down our communications. By all logical calculations, we should have been wiped out in the first day. He paused, letting his words sink in. In the audience, aliens who had been so confident just weeks before shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But we weren't wiped out, Kane continued. We won. And we won because of something that has nothing to do with technology or superior firepower. We won because of partnership. Commander Vexstar rose slowly from his seat in the front row. The Drachner warrior still moved carefully. His injuries from the evacuation center weren't completely healed yet. But he had insisted on being here today, and he had something important to say. Permission to speak, Admiral? Vexstar's translator converted his words into standard galactic. But everyone could hear the emotion in his original voice. Kane nodded and stepped aside. Vexstar walked to the podium with measured steps, his yellow eyes sweeping across the assembled crowd. When he spoke, his words were quiet, but carried to every corner of the room. I have been a warrior for 47 years, he began. I have commanded fleets that could destroy entire worlds. I have weapons that can tear holes in space itself. I believed that power came from technology, from superior equipment and advanced sensors. He looked down at Rex, and something like shame crossed his reptilian features. 3 weeks ago, I laughed at humans for bringing animals to war. I called them pets. I thought they were weak and foolish. He paused, his forked tongue flicking out nervously. I was wrong about everything. The hall was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the ship's engines. When I was trapped under that collapsed beam, bleeding and certain I would die, it was not advanced technology that saved me. It was not a sophisticated AI or a quantum computer. It was a small dog named Scout, whose handler was nowhere nearby, who had no orders to help me, who didn't even know my name. Vexter's voice grew stronger. That animal risked his life to pull me to safety, not because he was programmed to, not because he was ordered to, but because something inside him, something deeper than any technology we possess, told him it was the right thing to do. In the audience, other aliens began nodding. The Chitex representatives' mandibles clicked softly in what humans had learned was their version of agreement. Several Aquarians made the gurgling sounds that indicated deep thought. These humans showed us something our advanced civilizations had forgotten, Vexstar continued. They showed us that the strongest bonds are not formed by circuits and code, but by trust, loyalty, and willing sacrifice. They showed us that true partnership cannot be programmed or manufactured, it must be earned. Colonel Lisa Hayes stood up next, her own dress uniform crisp and clean. The human military has worked with dogs for thousands of years, she said, when Kane gestured for her to speak. But even we learned something new during this battle. We learned that these partnerships can extend beyond species, beyond language, beyond everything we thought we understood about loyalty. She looked directly at Rex, who seemed to sense her attention, and tilted his head slightly. Duke protected a Chitex warrior he'd never met. Bella carried wounded Drakner soldiers to safety. Scouts stayed with Commander Vexstar, even when the building was collapsing around them. They didn't do this because of their training. They did it because once you're part of the pack, species doesn't matter. The Chidex representative, a large female with distinctive red markings, stepped forward. Her species rarely showed emotion, but something in her posture suggested deep respect. We formally request permission to establish joint training programs with human military units, she announced, her translated voice echoing through the hall. We wish to learn these partnership protocols. We wish to understand this, bonding, similar. Requests came from a dozen other species. The Aquarians wanted to study human-animal cooperation. The energy beings from the Vortex Nebula asked about adapting the methods for their unique physiology. Even the usually isolated crystalline confederacy expressed interest in learning more. Rex's tail wagged once, just once, but it was enough. For the first time since humans had joined the Galactic Defense Coalition, the aliens weren't laughing at them. They were asking to learn from them. The age of human canine warfare had officially begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.